How's everyone doing today? We've been doing a bunch of running up until this week, and I am officially in my taper for the 2022 Chicago Marathon this year. I thought it might be interesting as I start to think about my racing shoes, just to show you how some of the midsole wear has taken place on a pair of my Nike Next% 2, and I just got a fresh pair of Nike Next% 2 as they may be my racing shoe for Chicago as well. So I have about 120 miles as a 230-pound runner in my Nike Next% 2. So let's compare that pair to the new pair, look at some of the differences, the wear on the outsole, the wear on the midsole. Let's jump right into it. Hey everybody, so while I have the new pair of Nike Next% 2 in hand, ready to go possibly for Chicago, still making a decision, and I'll let you know what my final choice is on race shoe for the Chicago Marathon very soon. But I do have a new pair, and I have this other pair that now has about 120 miles on it. They are the same size, a size 12.5 for men's, and they are the exact same shoe, the Nike Next% 2. The point I want to go over is just what are some of the differences between this new pair and this used pair. I get a lot of questions about when people change their shoes. There's been some discussions in the Discord about when people like to rotate their shoes. So I just want to show an extreme example here with a race shoe or one of the elite racing shoes that tend to break down very quickly. For me, 120 miles is really all that I'm going to put in this shoe when it comes to racing. I may use it for a few other workouts or something like that, but otherwise I'll show you in just a second why ultimately this is going to be retired and what those differences really are. All right, first let's start with the upper. So what are the differences in the upper of the shoe, new to old? Long story short, really nothing. There's no breakdown in the upper for this pair of Nike Next% 2 that have 120 miles in them. All of the laces are in great shape. The upper itself has no tears, no rips. It's very dirty, but that's just from sweat and things over the year. This was the shoe that I used for the 2021 New York City Marathon and then some other fun races and workouts since then. Everything with this heel collar still intact, very simple to see that there's nothing wrong with it at all. So old to new, the upper is not going to be what's giving you any issues. Now I'm going to move to the outsole. It is a factor as far as there's wear. If you look at the outsole of this original Nike Next% 2 with 120 miles, you can see that mostly on the forefoot there's a couple punctures just from rocks and things like that. They're very, very small. It's really hard to see probably on camera. So plenty of rubber still in the forefoot. As you move to the midfoot area, you can see that that's where there's some of that discoloration and probably actual wear from touching the ground, but nothing that's unusable. And then as you move towards the heel, you'll see that the lateral or outside portion of my foot, where you tend to land first just in the mechanics of a running stride, does have a little bit of wear. The rubber is still present. It's just some of those lines and grooves that have worn down, but then also some of the Zoom X foam in the middle of those two rubber strips is starting to wear away, where it's actually compressing and touching the ground and wearing away slightly. And you see that a little bit just on the very back of the medial or inside portion of my heel as well. So again, it's not game changing, but that's just the wear pattern that I've seen so far with about 120 miles. But again, it's not the main issue that's going to cause me to want to retire this shoe or change this shoe entirely. Okay, so at this point you're probably wondering why I'm even making this video, what the point is, and now we're going to get into what the meat of the issue and the discussion is. We're going to get into the midsole compression. First, visually, you can see on the midsole that there are various creases, and I've actually gone ahead and started to fill them in with a pen just to show you really the areas that the creases are different from those other vertical and horizontal lines that are kind of etched into the shoe from the beginning. You can see that even on a newer pair there are these little lines and ridges. So that's not a crease that I'm talking about. The creases are where it's actually changes in the foam that have compressed, and there's crease lines that are there to accommodate the now compressed sole itself. It's just the nature of any shoe's midsole. As you wear it, as you put weight on it, midsole, whatever the material, is going to slowly compress more and more. Obviously, the goal when you're running is for it to compress and spring back and give you a little bit of energy return in each one of your strides. But at the end of the day, it wears out and it slowly becomes less and less full, or less and less of its original stack height as you use the shoe for many, many miles, many, many days, months, years, whatever it might be. Now again, ZoomX foam is an elite running shoe material. It's built to be very, very light, but not very durable. So this compression starts to happen very early on in the shoe. You can actually see there's more on the inside here, or the medial side of the shoe, that I didn't highlight with pen, but it's still very visible in comparison to a new pair, that all of those crease lines are there. Now, what else does that mean? What else do those creases represent? Well, I took a little bit of a non-scientific approach and just marked on a piece of paper the different heights of the forefoot just beyond this little like checkered flag pattern on the forefoot, and then in between the two O's of the ZoomX on the back on the lateral side. And I actually went ahead and measured just by that little line on the heel on the medial side as well, so we could see the differences in stack height in the shoe right now. So what are those numbers? On the new shoe, in a size 12.5, what I'm getting more or less for the front is a 1.5 inch stack height, or 38.1 millimeters. So again, right around the middle of that little checkered flag pattern, you have about 38 millimeters of stack height in the forefoot in this size 12.5. Then on the back, again in between those two O's more or less, there's about 46 millimeters of stack height in this shoe. Now you might be thinking to yourself, whoa, that doesn't make sense. The max stack height allowed for these races are 40 millimeters. I forget what shoe size that measurement is taken. I believe it's at a men's size 9. I could be wrong about that. But more or less then from the size 9, if you wear a smaller size than a 9, you're actually getting less stack height in a shoe. And if you're wearing a larger size than a size 9, you're actually getting more stack height, because everything needs to grow in ratio, so the stack height does get bigger. In general, again, any shoe company is going to have a little bit more stack height in their bigger sizes and a little bit less stack height in their smaller sizes. So 46 millimeters in the heel, 38 millimeters in the forefoot on a new shoe. Now, if we look at the old shoe, again, 120 miles really isn't a lot for most running shoes, but this is a racing shoe with a super foam on a super shoe. The front, again in the same spot, measured at about 36.5 millimeters. So that's about 1.5 millimeters less than it had on the new shoe. And then the back is where the numbers get even more different. You have about 46 millimeters of stack height, remember, on the new shoe, and only 41.3 millimeters of stack height on the lateral or outside portion of the heel on the used shoe with 120 miles. Because of the wear pattern on the outsole, I thought maybe that had some impact on the height overall. So I did measure the inside or medial portion where I didn't have as much wear, and those numbers still came out to 47.63 millimeters in the new shoe and 42.86 millimeters of stack height in the old shoe. So you're losing, give or take 4 millimeters, I'd say, of stack height in the heel between the old shoe and the new shoe. It's not game changing. It's not going to mean that this shoe is broken or unusable, but all of that stack height that's lost, again, is compression in the midsole. It means that it's not going to be as energetic. It doesn't have as good of an ability to spring you back off of the ground and give you your best race times. And it also just isn't as good at, or doesn't do as well of a job cushioning each stride that you take as you land on the ground. Over the course of a full marathon, that little bit of impact difference adds up. The energy return that you get from a new versus old shoe adds up, and ultimately that's why you see a lot of people retiring these shoes around 100 miles. Now, of course, I'm a heavier guy. It might be a little bit better or a little bit worse for some people based on their mechanics, based on their weight. There's not a 100% across the board best way to tell how your shoe is compressing. It's always interesting though when you get a new shoe of the same kind, you can start to visibly see that the shoe has actually gotten shorter, the stack height is compressed, and like I always say, look for these big lines and creases, because ultimately they're coming from the shoe slowly compressing more and more of that foam down just a little bit more. And maybe for a daily trainer it's going to be over the course of 400 miles, but for a lot of these super shoes and racing shoes with these very light foams, it's only going to take 100 to 200 miles for you to start seeing that compression. And that's why I say don't worry so much about the outsole. Don't worry so much about what everyone's telling you the lifespan of a shoe can be. I mean, I've seen people online who take these shoes over 1,000 kilometers. I imagine the stack height is pretty compressed at that point. It might work as a running shoe, but again, it's not going to give you anywhere near the benefit of a brand new pair. And honestly, again, for me, it may start to lead to injuries if I'm heavier and I'm sinking into the shoe in different ways, or it's compressed unevenly. So it's not really an indication, again, of when you should retire a shoe, but it's just interesting to see the different measurements and how quickly this shoe can compress in stack height and with the foam over time. Nike Next Percent 2, not a good thing or a bad thing, but if you want the best out of your racing shoe, you're going to want to start with a new pair.